Most people cancel plans because something came up, but some people cancel in a way that feels personal. Not angry, not dramatic, just suddenly gone. A sorry, can't make it, that lands like a small betrayal because you can't even argue with it. And if you've ever been on the receiving end, you know the weirdest part isn't the change of plans. It's the way it makes you question your place in their life, like you were optional the whole time. Stay with me, because there's a hidden logic to last-minute canceling that almost nobody says out loud, and once you see it, you won't unsee it. Also, if you're the one who gets canceled on a lot, you're not broken for feeling it deeply. Your reaction makes sense. This just isn't talked about enough in a real way. A last-minute cancel doesn't just cancel an event, it cancels a version of you that was already preparing. The you that showered, got ready, shifted your mood, pictured the conversation, saved energy for the person. So when they drop out at the last second, you don't only lose an hour, you lose the emotional shape you built around it. Have you noticed how the body reacts like it's been stood up even when the words are polite? And that's why it stings more than it should. Because this isn't about logistics, it's about belonging. Some people treat plans like commitments, others treat plans like possibilities, and they don't realize they're speaking two different emotional languages. To you, a plan is a small promise. To them, it's a draft. Does this sound familiar? Here's where it gets interesting. For a certain type of person, canceling isn't about disrespect. It's about control. Not control over you. Control over their own internal state. They say yes when they're optimistic, social, energized, or lonely. And then the day arrives, and their nervous system wakes up in a completely different weather. Suddenly the plan feels like a demand. Suddenly it feels like being trapped inside someone else's expectations, and they panic in a quiet way. When was the last time you felt someone disappear right when things were supposed to become real? A lot of last-minute cancelers aren't flakes. They're people who struggle with emotional continuity, meaning they can sincerely want something in one moment and sincerely not want it later. Not because they lied. Because their identity is state-based. They become whoever their mood is, and plans force them to be consistent across time, which sounds simple, but for them it feels like being pinned down. Have you noticed how some people seem allergic to being locked in? But that's not the full story. Because sometimes canceling isn't fear, it's status. There are people who cancel last minute because on some level it proves something. That their time is expensive, that they're in demand, that they don't have to explain themselves. They may never say that out loud, and they might not even consciously think it. But the behavior creates a quiet hierarchy. You adjust, they don't. You wait, they decide. And if you grew up having to earn attention, that dynamic hits a nerve fast. Have you noticed how it doesn't feel like a change? It feels like being downgraded? Now, halfway through, here's the angle that reframes everything. Sometimes the last-minute cancel isn't about you at all, and it isn't even about them being inconsiderate. It's about intimacy. Because plans are not just schedules. Plans are closeness on the calendar, and closeness triggers people differently. For some people, closeness feels warm, like safety. For others, closeness feels like exposure, like they're about to be seen too clearly, expected too much, or held to a version of themselves they can't reliably perform. So they cancel right before the moment they'd have to show up as a real person, not just a text bubble with potential. This is the part most people miss. Canceling can be a way to keep a relationship in the safe zone where nothing is demanded. Have you noticed how some people are amazing at connecting? As long as it stays weightless, and that creates a specific pain on the other side, because you're not just losing the hangout, you're losing the sense that you matter enough to be planned for, and the mind does what the mind always does. It tries to solve the mystery by blaming you. Maybe you were too eager, too available, too intense. Maybe you asked at the wrong time. Maybe you're not the kind of person people follow through for. But that's rarely the truth. More often, you're colliding with someone else's relationship to responsibility, anxiety, identity, and freedom. Does that land? If last-minute cancellations hit you harder than other people seem to understand, that doesn't mean you're too sensitive. It usually means you're someone who bonds through reliability. You invest emotionally early, not in a desperate way, just in a human way. You treat a plan like a small act of trust. You start building a shared world as soon as something is agreed upon, and when someone cancels, you don't only feel inconvenience. You feel a rupture in the invisible agreement that says, you can count on me. That trait is not accidental, it's adaptive. It often comes from being the person who had to track other people's moods, the person who learned to prepare, to anticipate, to stabilize the social temperature so nothing falls apart. So when someone cancels casually, your nervous system doesn't interpret it as a change. It interprets it as, oh, I misread the safety here, and that's why it echoes. Have you noticed how you don't just feel disappointed, you feel alert? But in the right context, this is an advantage, because you're not addicted to excitement. You're oriented toward meaning. You don't want infinite options. You want real follow-through. You don't want constant novelty. You want something that can hold weight without collapsing. And that means your life gets quieter in one way, but stronger in another. So here's a question worth sitting with. What does it say about you that you don't find last-minute canceling normal? Where do you invest your emotional energy? Into people who keep things flexible so they never have to be responsible? Or into people who move with a little more care? Are you playing the same game as everyone else, or a different one? You're not hard to please. You're built for relationships that don't require you to shrink your expectations just to stay connected. If you want, tell me in the comments. Do you get canceled on? Or are you the one who cancels when it gets close? And if this hit, the next layer to explore is why some people only feel safe in relationships they can exit instantly,